Right off the bat, there's some clickbait to the title. I'm not saying that Stoner is a pathetic novel, or that Williams is a pathetic novelist, or that anybody who reads and loves Stoner is a pathetic person. I am myself definitely in the camp of somebody who sees this novel as a great campus novel for sure, and a great novel generally speaking. But I'm very interested in the question of whether Stoner is a pathetic character or a tragic character. And I want to get into the distinction between those two in a little bit. Hey, it's Andrew with the Isle of Misfit Books, where we discuss books that have struck me and stuck with me in my 25 years of working in rare books. And today we're going to be taking a look at John Williams' novel Stoner, which is a book that we only started selling as a rare first edition about halfway through my career, with the arrival of a younger colleague who really championed the book. He was a big fan and felt like this is a book that we ought to be selling as a rare book, that this was only going to become more popular and more collectible as the years went on. And I believe that has been borne out. This novel has definitely gone through a resurgence. Originally published in 1965, this is a New York Review of Books reissue. My own son, who is 23, recently recommended it to me, so I figured I would give it a go and have a read. Stoner's a man who came to the university a little bit by surprise. He had grown up as the son of farmers working on a hardscrabble farm in Missouri who were struggling to make ends meet. A college agent mentions that he would be a good candidate for the school, and so the parents and Stoner himself, thinking that this would be a way for them to maybe make the farm itself more productive, agree to send him to the school. Of course, once he's there, he falls in love. I hesitate to say falls in love because he has a real hard time falling in love with anything or anybody, and that's a theme of the novel. But he falls in love, let's say, with English literature, decides to stay in school and go on to pursue a master's, and actually goes on to become a professor at that very same school, which he sees as sort of a haven for people like him who don't quite fit in anymore with the farming world, but yet don't fit in with the sort of the hustle and bustle of contemporary business or industrial culture, or military culture for that matter. He considers joining up when World War I comes around and there's a big recruitment drive, but in the end he opts to stay at home. He's born in 1890, and it traces his life from birth through death, which is shortly after retirement, covering a large period of time there, the two world wars, the Great Depression, with Stoner standing in for the country at large, going through a period of great social change where the country as a whole is moving from rural, agricultural-based society into the cities, into towns, into suburbs, and becoming more of an industrial workforce, but also starting to move into this idea that college is the way to go forward, the way to better yourself intellectually, but also in terms of better your prospects for employment. The relationships that he does have tend to be intense and adversarial and frankly disrespectful. And I'm thinking in particular of his wife, Edith. She is manipulative, she is narcissistic, possibly even sociopathic. She marries him largely because her parents agree that she will marry him once Stoner proposes, which is after only knowing her for 2 or 3 weeks, if I recall correctly. Very brief amount of time, not really getting to know her, but just the first woman basically that has drawn his eye. Proposes marriage, and it's not so much that she agrees as it is that her parents agree for her. So you can almost kind of understand a bit of her frustration and anger and passive aggressiveness. But she does come to hate Stoner. She's certainly not attracted to him, certainly does not love him, and certainly does not respect him. And then the other cartoonish villain is Professor Lomax, who is Stoner's rival. And this is my favorite passage, my favorite several chapters, sort of a mini arc in the novel, and I think it's what makes it not just a great campus novel, but a great novel, period, is this battle of wills between Stoner and Professor Lomax. Now, Lomax he's got a hunchback, he walks awkwardly, he's a handsome man, but he has some spinal issues. He's brilliant, but very sharp, very spiky, let's say. Much as Stoner initially wants to get along with him, they just do not mix. They're oil and water. The arc between them comes to a head when Lomax's graduate student, Charles Walker, talks his way into one of Stoner's classes. Walker, like Lomax, has a similar spinal issue, but is similarly brilliant. And what Walker has that Stoner doesn't have is an ability to improvise and an ability to just sort of talk passionately off the top of his head, especially about a topic that he knows a lot about, which is 19th century poetry, romantic poetry. He is sort of the quintessential romantic in this particular piece, and Stoner is very much not a romantic. It comes to a head when Walker goes to defend his master's, to petition the department to continue on with his PhD program. Lomax obviously wants him to continue. Stoner, because of altercations that they've had in Stoner's seminar, and I think also just because Walker rubs him the wrong way, Stoner decides to really be a stickler and pushes him, and ultimately exposes the fact that Walker does not know much about English literature outside of the period that he is familiar with, the very narrow period that he's familiar with, and so Stoner decides to do his best to torpedo Walker from continuing along the PhD program. It's presented as Stoner just looking to test the young man's knowledge, and by doing so, proving that the young man is not actually prepared to pursue a PhD. His biggest offense is not so much that he's not prepared, but it's that he picks on Catherine Driscoll. Now, Catherine Driscoll is another graduate student in this seminar, and she has also caught Stoner's eye. Lonely Stoner, and he ultimately makes a play for Catherine, acknowledges his attraction, she reciprocates, and the two of them carry on a clandestine affair, an affair that they have to keep secret because she is a graduate student. This is the bright spot in the novel. This is his actual experience of being in love. And at the very least, Stoner does have that. He does have a moment of being genuinely in love with somebody and having that reciprocated. You're relieved as a reader that he gets this respite, that he gets this ultimately very rewarding experience of what true love actually is, even though they both know all along that it will not last. Walker is picking on her at length, and I think this is really what just gets Stoner to dislike this young man right off the bat and just never let up. Are Lomax and Walker in the right? Is it okay for a student to just specialize in a particular period and be very, knowledgeable and passionate about that? Would that passion for this subject be as much of an asset when he is a professor? Because that's what a PhD program is training you to do, is to be a professor, right? Is to teach students. Is that passion and that ability to speak and inspire, is that as much an asset to a future professor as is Stoner's drier but maybe more comprehensive understanding of a broader scope of the history and the facts and the details of literature and its progression and how it has changed and its influences over time? Which is the more valuable to be conveying to your students? Or is there a world in which both can exist? And I would argue the latter, but Stoner clearly seems to believe that his way is the right way and Lomax and Walker's way is the wrong way. And he's decided that he's going to be the arbiter on this, and he's going to do his best to torpedo Walker. It is a personal thing in the end, I think. It's ambiguous, and that's what I think makes this such a great novel, is that ambiguity around that core conflict between Stoner, Walker, and Lomax. What makes something pathetic versus tragic? Both words are used in the popular culture to imply that something is, weak or bad. Pathetic in particular is just used offhand to say that something or somebody is weak or despicable, does not deserve our respect. Tragic even is often used just to as a throwaway insult. A bad joke can be tragic. A terrible outfit can be tragic. But to my mind, when it comes to stories and when it comes to characters, the tragic is a character who tries their best, tries repeatedly, and yet fails. And that failure could be the result of powerful external forces arrayed against that character that are just too much to overcome. It could be powerful internal forces that work at counter purposes, that work against him or her, and that sabotage his or her attempts to get what it is that they are striving for. And often it's a combination of both of those things, right? But it's the trying and the failing. That's what marks a tragedy to my mind. Whereas a character or a story that's pathetic is more one where the character fails to try. And that's how I see this. I think it's very clear that, yes, Stoner is long-suffering. Yes, he does stoically accept his situation, but he does not try to change that situation. The marriage is something that he brought on himself. He proposed to Edith after knowing her for 3 weeks. He hardly knew her because he grew up in a household where the parents obviously did not know how to express their love, did not know how to show him how to accept love, how to be loved, nor how to love. He's ill-equipped, right? He sees a woman that he's attracted to. She's essentially the first one that he's attracted to, and he's determined to marry her. And, given that time, it's not entirely unusual. Now, I think the 3-week courtship is probably a little unusual, but the idea that her parents would decide for her is not that unusual for that time period and that place. But it was his decision. He was the one who made that happen, right? And when he quickly realizes that it was, if not a mistake, or that she hates him, he retreats. With Lomax, similarly, after making a few attempts, he refuses to try to repair that relationship. The relationship that really, to my mind, makes this a pathetic rather than a tragic novel is his relationship with his daughter Grace, which is a close relationship when Grace is younger. Edith is very hands-off when Grace is young, and Grace and Stoner seem to have they don't speak much, but they seem to have a very close connection. But as Grace gets older, Edith insists that Grace is unhappy, insists that she needs to be more popular, and so on, and starts to get her hooks in and manipulate Grace. And Stoner essentially surrenders his daughter. That's not tragedy. That's pathetic. And Grace then gets pregnant and gets married, essentially to escape their household, because they are just recreating the loveless situation that Stoner grew up in. And it's understandable that Grace is miserable and unhappy. And there's a point late in the novel where Grace comes to visit Stoner, and it's clear, and she says as much, shows as much and says as much, that she is an alcoholic. And he even says, this is a horrible line, that he's happy for her because at least she has alcohol to make her life more bearable. And that is so dispiriting, so dark, and such a horrible thing for a parent to say about a child that presumably they love, or at least would like to love. And I just found that to be heartbreaking. Obviously, it's meant to be heartbreaking. It is heartbreaking. It's human, but it's horrible. And that's why I say that was a relationship well within his power to stick up for her, to maintain his connection with his daughter. And he surrenders. He does not try. He fails to try. I can see why readers, and in particular male readers, would empathize and sympathize, feel that they can sympathize with Stoner, that he is a man who is put upon and a man who is long-suffering and is surrounded by people that he does not particularly like in his work life and in his home life. And I get it, that people exist and live in these situations and are stuck or feel stuck in loveless marriages or in thankless workplaces. In the introduction to this New York Review of Books edition, John McGahern mentions that in a rare interview given late in life, John Williams says of Stoner, in quotes, "I think he's a real hero. A lot of people who have read the novel think that Stoner had such a sad and bad life. I think he had a very good life. He had a better life than most people do, certainly. He was doing what he wanted to do. He had some feeling for what he was doing. He had some sense of the importance of the job he was doing. He was a witness to values that are important. The important thing in the novel to me is Stoner's sense of a job." That's the author's take on his character, on his novel. But I would argue that that does not make one a hero. That does not make one a tragic figure. But in this case, a pathetic figure. You know, he is ill-equipped, and that for him can be tragic, and he can see it as tragic. But we as readers have our modern day perspective, and I think we need to bring that to this character and say, no, this is not a tragic figure. This is a pathetic figure. This is a figure who had every opportunity to take control of his life, to take accountability and responsibility for his life, and chose not to. Once, late, after his evening class, he returned to his office and sat at his desk trying to read. It was winter, and a snow had fallen during the day, so that the out-of-doors was covered with a white softness. The office was overheated. He opened a window beside the desk so that the cool air might come into the close room. He breathed deeply and let his eyes wander over the white floor of the campus. On an impulse, he switched out the light on his desk and sat in the hot darkness of his office. The cold air filled his lungs, and he leaned toward the open window. He heard the silence of the winter night, and it seemed to him that he somehow felt the sounds that were absorbed by the delicate and intricately cellular being of the snow. Nothing moved upon the whiteness. It was a dead scene, which seemed to pull at him, to suck at his consciousness just as it pulled the sound from the air and buried it within a cold white softness. He felt himself pulled outward toward the whiteness, which spread as far as he could see, and which was a part of the darkness from which it glowed, of the clear and cloudless sky without height or depth. For an instant he felt himself go out of the body that sat motionless before the window, and as he felt himself slip away, everything, the flat whiteness, the trees, the tall columns, the night, the far stars, seemed incredibly tiny and far away, as if they were dwindling to a nothingness. Then, behind him, a radiator clanked. He moved, and the scene became itself. We've all been there. We've all done that. I certainly have. It's easier to feel bad about your situation than to actually take a step and do something about it, and to bring yourself into conflict with people or with a situation, a work situation, or a domestic situation. It is often, in fact, easier to feel the intense discomfort of the pain that causes than it is to try to change that. And that's why I think we have to see this nowadays as a cautionary tale. It's a warning of what can happen if you fail to try, if you fail to take responsibility for your circumstances, for your life. But I'd be interested to hear what you think. Do you see Stoner as Williams did? Do you see Stoner as a hero? Is he a formidable example of a stoic who is long-suffering and who is bearing his fate, with maybe with a lowered head, but with, a sturdy back, and he's soldiering on and doing what he can to make the best of a bad situation? I think it could be read that way. I'd be interested to hear if you do see him as a tragic figure or as a heroic figure in that sense. So I hope you got some value. Hope you got some entertainment out of this brief discussion of John Williams's Stoner. What do you think? Tragic figure or pathetic? I'd love to hear in the comments below. If you made it to this point in the video, please leave a like. Consider hitting subscribe. I've got a couple of novels that I've published that I have links to in the description box below. But I've got a new novel coming out in September titled Dig Two Graves, a thriller of revenge. And I'm really excited about that. I was just looking at some cover designs that look beautiful, and I will have more news about that coming up in future videos as well. That's all I got for you today. Thanks for stopping by. I'll see you in the next one.